Welcome, everyone. My name is Diane. I am the Director of Clinical and Support Programs at Gilda's Club Rochester. And today I am really excited to introduce you to Sue Czap. I'm going to read her bio. She is a registered dietitian and board certified specialist in oncology nutrition at UR Medicine's Wilmot Cancer Institute and the Pluta Integrative Oncology and Wellness Center at U of R. She works with patients and care partners to optimize nutrition during the cancer continuum from diagnosis to post-treatment. Since 2014, she's led the Cooking for Wellness plant-based cooking class in collaboration with Gilda's Club Rochester. So Sue will be discussing basics of plant-based eating, talking about portion sizes and lots of other exciting things, and just a couple housekeeping. You'll notice that you do not have a video, but you can, if you have any questions as Sue is giving her presentation, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, I will come back on the video and we'll ask questions and have a bit of a Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and take my video off, and Sue, without further ado, we're really excited to hear your presentation.
Thanks, Diane. Hi, everybody. This is a great turnout. Thanks for joining us at lunchtime today. As Diane said, I'm going to give kind of a brief intro just to kind of give you an idea of what recommendations there are related to diet and cancer. And then should be plenty of time for questions. Thank you to those of you that submitted questions when you registered. I did try to incorporate some of that information in my presentation, so hopefully I've been able to address some of your concerns. And it did help me to kind of customize the presentation for what you were looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the presentation. Let me just get the right format there for you. So the objectives for today's program is to talk about plant-based eating patterns and how their role is in cancer protection. We're going to talk about portion sizes. We did have several requests for further clarification on portion sizes, so we'll incorporate that as we talk about what foods to eat for cancer protection. There are also several questions that came in on protein, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that, talking about different animal-based and plant-based sources of protein. And also at the end, I'm going to show you some resources that you can access online and some cookbooks that I like to use where you can go for credible nutrition information. I'm sure many of you have experienced just Googling nutrition and cancer, and it's very overwhelming on the internet. And unfortunately, a lot of it is just not evidence-based or reliable. So I want to make sure that you are getting accurate and evidence-based nutrition information. On that note, just a quick disclaimer here. These are going to be very general nutrition guidelines. Everything may not apply to your situation. If you really have individualized questions, and nutrition is not a one-size-fits-all type thing, I do recommend that you get a nutrition consultation. At where I work at UR Medicine and Wilmot, we do have dietitians available, and those phone numbers are posted there at the Pluta location where I am, and also at the Strong Hospital or Elmwood location, there's an outpatient dietitian. If you're a patient served by Rochester Regional or Lipson, they have a dietitian too. I'm not as comfortable with her availability. I don't know the extent of their services, but I always encourage patients to talk to their oncologist if they have nutrition concerns, and to try to get a referral to a dietitian so they can get individualized recommendations. So just bearing in mind that this is more of a general overview in this session here today. And kind of on that note, the next slide talks about, although we all talk about cancer in general, cancer is very unique and different depending on the cancer site, your treatment, things like that. So as I alluded to before, it's not a one size fits all. And so, your nutrition needs are individualized. And so one piece of information may not apply to you. In general, patients that can tolerate a low calorie, less processed food, high fiber diet are patients generally that either have breast cancer, prostate cancer, and some patients even with colon cancer after they've had their treatment can do better with a whole foods, plant-based type diet. However, there are going to be situations where patients just have trouble eating those types of foods because of the side effects from treatment or because of changes in their anatomy and physiology from treatment. And so those patients really need a modified, more individualized approach. So as I said, some of these recommendations may not apply to everybody, and you do need to customize it based on your individual needs. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about if you can generally eat well, you don't have a lot of side effects or treatment implications. The recommended eating pattern by the American Institute of Cancer Research and the American Cancer Society is a whole foods, plant-based diet. And two key words there are whole foods. So you want to be eating less processed foods, foods that are as close as possible to their natural state. And then plant-based, focusing on foods that are grown. So we'll talk a little bit more about what plant-based foods, but those are the two key concepts of a cancer protective diet. So if you look at the plate on the left, that's what we call the standard American diet, or the acronym SAD, because it is a little sad, unfortunately. It's not really a balanced diet. It's not rich in a lot of nutrients. You can see it's a very large portion of meat, a large portion of potatoes with butter, and a little portion of a little bit of color there, some little few green peas. So that's kind of more the traditional or standard American diet that many of us grew up on, myself included. And what we're trying to do is to transition more to the plate that's on the right-hand side. This is more of a cancer protective diet or a whole foods plant-based diet. And you can see there's lots of colors, focusing on vegetables and fruit, whole grains. It looks like there's some brown rice there, and lean proteins such as fish. So that's kind of the shift that we're trying to make in our eating pattern. And notice I'm not using the word diet. I try to use more an eating pattern. To me, diet means something that you go on and off of. Eating pattern is more what you're doing as your usual healthy lifestyle. And it's a long-term commitment. This is not something that you follow one day and not the next, or follow it for a month and then go off it. This is more a long-term lifestyle habit. So I like to define plant-based eating. I have found over the past couple of years that the term has evolved and means different things for different people. So when I refer to plant-based eating, and as a nutrition professional, when we talk about plant-based eating, we look at a whole spectrum. It's oftentimes people assume plant-based eating means vegetarian or vegan, where you really limit meat and animal products. But really plant-based eating just refers to diets that are, majority of your foods are plant-based. So if you start on the left-hand side, I call it a plant-forward type diet. And that's where at least 2/3 of your plate, or the majority of your foods, are plant-based or things that are grown. You can still have animal-based foods, but they're not the focus of their plate. They're a much smaller proportion of the plate. So this is more in line with what you would call maybe a Mediterranean diet, which is very popular and has been recently rated as a very good eating pattern to follow. Pescatarian would be something that includes fish, but maybe not meat. And that again is kind of in line with that Mediterranean type concept. Vegetarian, there's different variations of vegetarian. Usually you don't have meat or fish, but you might include dairy products or eggs. And then the vegan, which is the most restricted of plant-based eating patterns, is no animal products at all. So all of these can be cancer protective. Again, the key is the proportion of plant-based foods. You want your majority of your foods to be plant-based. So you still can have a cancer protective diet without having to go as far as being a vegetarian or a vegan. And you really have to find where you're comfortable on this spectrum. You know, if you want a cancer protective diet, you want to be at least at the plant forward spot on the spectrum, but you don't necessarily have to go all the way to the vegan to still be cancer protective. You need to find where you're comfortable based on your food preferences, your medical history, your family, economics, all of those things come to play. So I work with patients at various points on this spectrum based on where their comfort level is. So that's something you kind of have to decide for yourself, how far or what point you want to be on this spectrum of plant-based eating patterns. I'm going to spend most of my time kind of focusing on the plant-forward pescatarian part of the spectrum, just because the majority of the people are in that zone. Although any of the recommendations I make can certainly be adapted for vegetarian or vegan eating patterns also. So we will be talking about all of these areas in today's presentation. So the key benefit for plant-based diets and why we want to have a lot of plant-based foods in our diet is because they contain what we call phytonutrients, and that's that term there underlined. And phyto means plant nutrients, and I like to think of it as more the word phyto, like being strong. But these are the nutrients that are in plant-based foods that are different from vitamins and minerals, but are important to health. And there's hundreds of these phytonutrients. You've probably heard of some of them, and I have a nice chart there that outlines them. Those are antioxidants, beta-carotene, indoles, lycopene, anthocyanins that give it color. So you want to get a good variety of these phytonutrients because these are really the disease fighters. And since there's so many phytonutrients, you want to eat a good variety of foods. The more food you eat, you're going to get more phytonutrients in. So it's good to get different plant-based foods as well as a broad variety. You just don't want to be focusing on eating the same foods over and over again. And I like to break it kind of down by these color groups that are listed here. I encourage you to eat from each of these color groups every day. You should eat something green, something orange, something red, something blue, and something white. And that way you get a good variety of different phytonutrients. And that kind of takes us into our next slide when we're going to talk about fruits and vegetables. So now that we know what a plant-based diet is and why it's important to follow a plant-based diet to get a good intake of those phytonutrients, what are the foods that you should actually put on your plate? And to me, the foundation of a healthy plant-based eating pattern are fruits and vegetables. And I tell patients they want to try to strive for at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Usually what I say, you want 2 to 3 pieces of whole fruit a day and at least 3 servings of vegetables a day. And for some people that can be kind of challenging depending on where their current diet is at. But what I usually tell people to do is that all of your meals and snacks, you want to include at least 1 serving of a fruit or a vegetable. And to get back to that variety concept that I was talking about with the phytonutrients, you want to change your produce based on the season. This time of year, I'm eating berries and melons and tomatoes, zucchini, all those different colored things, beets to get my blue in, as well as blueberries. And then in the winter, I tend to eat more citrus fruits, root vegetables, things like that. So you can change it up based on the season. And that way you're also getting produce that is more nutritious because it's at the peak of its harvest. You can use frozen and canned vegetables. Frozen vegetables can be just as nutritious as fresh. And when we have less availability around here in the winter, they are a good alternative. I find they're also good for small households that, you know, a 1 or 2 person household, they can just take out a small amount of the frozen vegetables that they need and they don't have as much waste. And then getting back to that concept of eating the rainbow of colors. So we'll go back to that previous slide and just mentioning trying to eat something from all of those different color groups. And since I did have a lot of questions about portion size, I included a chart here on the side. So if you're having cut up vegetables, about 1 cup is a portion size. If you're having something like raw leafy vegetables, spinach, lettuce, kale, something along those lines that aren't being cooked or in a salad, those are kind of light and fluffy, not very dense. So the portion size is 2 cups. Sweet potato or starchy vegetables such as corn or peas or white potatoes, the portion size is a 1/2 cup cooked. For fruit, the portion size is about a 1/2 cup or a small piece of fruit, about the size of a 1/2 of a baseball. Or if you're buying something like a banana, I recommend trying to get a banana that's about 5 to 6 inches in size, would be considered 1 serving. If you're eating dried fruit because it's more concentrated without the water and it's more dense, the portion size is only a 1/4 cup because it is dehydrated. So that would give you an idea of how to kind of plan out your number of servings of fruits and vegetables to get in over the course of the day. The other important food is to have some whole grains in your diet. Examples of whole grains are things like oatmeal, wheat berries, farro, quinoa, brown rice, bulgur. Basically, you want a whole grain that has the whole kernel intact. You want it to have that outer bran layer, which is going to give it dietary fiber and where a lot of those phytonutrients are found. Things that are not considered whole grains would be like white rice, white flour, things along those lines. So you want, again, the less processed, more whole food type of grains. The serving size for whole grains is a 1/2 cup cooked. So I often find people tend to overestimate their serving size of whole grains, but it's only about a 1/2 cup cooked. You know, if you don't already, I definitely recommend having some measuring cups on hand. I use these with patient education, but you know, maybe put together your plate and actually, you know, measure out your portion of your grains to make sure that your calorie intake is appropriate. For people that are trying to lose weight, oftentimes they're overeating on their portion of grains and carbohydrate. So it's one area to focus in on. If you're having cold breakfast cereals, you do want to try to find one that's less processed, more whole grain based, and also doesn't have a lot of added sugar. So you want to try to look for something that has less than 5 grams of added sugar And the nutrition facts label does indicate the amount of added sugar in food products now. That was changed within the past few years. And then also talking a little bit more about healthier fats to include in the diet. It's okay to have a small amount of healthier fat in your diet. It provides satiety, which helps to give you that feeling of fullness after a meal so that you're not hungry again in an hour or two. And fat is also needed to help in the absorption of fat-soluble nutrients. Some of the nutrients that we take in, like vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin D, vitamin E, and some phytonutrients like lycopene, are fat soluble, and your body better utilizes them and absorbs them with a little bit of fat. The key is to focus on more monounsaturated fats in your diet. So that would be from foods such as nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocados, less of the butter, margarine, full-fat dairy products, creams, things along those lines. But fat is very calorie dense. So again, if you're somebody that's trying to watch your weight, you do have to be mindful of the portion sizes and keep them pretty small. So that would mean measuring things like salad dressing, dips, things along those lines, and portions of nuts. That's another area I find people are often unaware of how many calories they're eating from nuts. A quarter of a cup of nuts has about 200 calories. So it's not unusual for me to hear from a patient that they're eating at least a cup, if not more, of nuts a day, and they're totally unaware that they're eating close to 800 calories a day just in nuts, which can be a little bit over exaggeration. They want a much more moderate intake of nuts and healthy fats. And then herbs and spices are certainly an important part of a plant-based eating pattern. Not only do they provide flavor to foods, but they also have some of those phytonutrients. Some of the ones that are really rich in phytonutrients would be things like ginger, curry, turmeric, basil, garlic. All of those things have some important phytonutrients and can be a good part of your cooking. And then next we're going to talk about protein. Again, this was an area where we had a lot of questions that were submitted early on. So you do want to have lean protein sources throughout the day. I recommend eating a little bit of protein at all of your meals and snacks. Again, that helps with the fat in terms of satiety. It takes a little bit longer for the body to digest protein as opposed to carbohydrates. So it helps to give you a little bit more staying power and that feeling of fullness. So there's two basic sources for protein. There's animal proteins and there's plant-based proteins. And you can still have animal proteins in a cancer protective diet, as we showed, but you want it to be not the majority. It's a smaller proportion in your plate. You can still have small amounts of red meat, and red meat does include beef, pork, and lamb. Despite the common conception that pork is the other white meat, from a nutrition perspective, it's considered a red meat because the nutritional profile is more similar to a red meat. And you want to have no more than 12 to 18 ounces of cooked red meat a week, and that's according to the American Institute for Cancer Research. Cold water fish like salmon, tuna, sardines, anchovies, rainbow trout provide omega-3s, which are a fat associated with reducing inflammation. And it's recommended to have those cold water fish a couple of times a week if you're including fish in your diet to get the appropriate amount of omega-3 fats. And then there's plant-based proteins that also provide protein, dietary fiber, and some phytonutrients because they are plant-based. However, as I said earlier on, there are some people that have difficulty tolerating the plant-based proteins because they tend to be very high in fiber because of their cancer diagnosis or treatment. So not everybody can tolerate them. And also some of the plant-based proteins have common food allergens. So some people actually have some food allergies to some of these things. But I put a chart here on the presentation. It shows common plant-based proteins on the left-hand side and animal-based proteins on the right-hand side. And we will talk a little bit about some of these serving sizes here. But you can see there's, a good variety of both. And certainly the animal-based proteins are a little bit more concentrated. You can get more protein in a smaller serving size, but it's certainly not to say that you can't meet your protein needs just from plant-based proteins. So for things like meat and fish, we talk about a 3-ounce portion size. So that would be about the size of a deck of cards. Let's see. For things like yogurt or cottage cheese, yogurt is about a 1 cup portion size, cottage cheese is a 1/2 cup. Eggs would be animal-based protein, and cheese. 1 ounces of cheese is about the size of 4 dice if you line them up, or about the size of your index finger. Plant-based proteins are usually measured like in cups as opposed to weight. So if you were going to have soy or lentils, legumes are things like chickpeas, kidney beans, cannellini beans, black-eyed peas, black beans, all of those kinds of things are considered what we call legumes. So about a 1/2 cup of those is a serving. There's a lot of plant-based milks out there now. There's soy milk, there's Ripple milk, which is a pea-based protein milk. Be a little bit more cautious with the almond milks. For the most part, almond milks are actually very low in protein. They have come out with some newer ones that have some added protein, so the protein content might be a little bit higher, but in general, the almond milk is quite low in protein. And then your nuts and seeds and your whole grains, things like quinoa, farro, all of those whole grains also provide a small amount of protein too. And if you have a few servings of those over the course of the day, it does add up to contributing to your overall protein intake. So there were a few questions about how do you know what your protein needs are and if you're getting enough protein. So protein needs are based on your body weight. So a quick way to estimate is if you take your body weight in pounds and you divide it by 2, it gives you approximately the number of grams of protein you need per day. So I gave a couple of examples. So if you're about 125 pounds, your protein needs are 45 to 60 grams a day. And again, these numbers are ranges. Rarely are you going to be eating the exact same number of calories and grams of protein a day. We all fall in a range, and then over the course of time, it kind of averages out. So there's not an exact number that you hit. Most of this is reported as a range. Whereas if you're a 200-pound individual, your protein needs would be higher at about 75 to 90 grams a day. And then when you are undergoing cancer treatment, whether it be surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, your protein needs are higher, and they can increase by as much as 20 to 50%. So it certainly is significant going through cancer treatment and the effect that it has on your protein needs. So I'm oftentimes working with patients, helping them come up with different types of protein sources to meet their needs based on what's going on with their treatment and the side effects that they're having. So we just spent a lot of time talking about the foods to include in your diet. Let's talk a little bit about the foods that you should limit. And the good news that this list is much shorter than all the healthy foods that you can have. But things that you should avoid that are associated with increasing inflammation or actual cancer risk are processed foods. As we talked about, you want to eat whole foods as close as possible to their natural state. You should limit smoked and cured meats. So that does include things like cold cuts, hot dogs, pepperoni, salami, sausages. Those are associated with colon cancer risk. You should avoid deep fried foods and charred meats. That's meats that are like blackened on the grill because they're cooked at very high temperatures. Alcohol should be limited. Sugar sweetened beverages, just because you get a lot of calories and really not any nutrition. And same with baked goods. You get lots of calories and not much nutrition with sweet drinks and baked goods. And again, it's not to say that you can't ever have these things, but it's not something that you want to be eating on a regular basis. So kind of how do you put this all together in terms of putting a meal on your table? Rather than counting servings and things like that, I like to use what I call the plate method. It's just a way to look at your plate and visualize your plate and make sure that you have the appropriate parts to your meal and not to have to get so hung up on the numbers and counting everything. So this concept is called the New American Plate, and it was put together by the American Institute for Cancer Research, which is a great resource, and I'll provide the email or the website address at the end of the presentation, but they have a lot of very good evidence-based information about diet and nutrition and cancer. But what I like to do is I like to look at my plate and I try to include 1 to 2 servings of fruits and vegetables. So I try to have a half a plate of fruits and vegetables, a serving of some type of whole grain. So that would be about a half a cup of brown rice, quinoa, a whole grain cereal, farro, anything along those lines. And then about a quarter of my plate would be the protein portion. So that could be animal protein or fish, or if you are vegetarian or vegan, it could include some of those lentils or legumes or soy, or you could use eggs or dairy products. Again, depending on where you are on that spectrum of plant-based eating patterns, that's going to determine what your protein options are. And so you want to really balance your meals with protein, carbohydrate, and a little bit of healthy fat, more of those monounsaturated fat sources, so that you have a good distribution of nutrients, you have more satiety or that feeling of fullness, and it just gives you more of an overall balanced meal. And then you have to have the appropriate portion sizes for your needs, and that would be for your calorie and protein needs, which again are going to be individualized for you. So if you have the opportunity to meet with a dietitian, they can help you determine what your calorie and protein needs are and help you to develop a meal plan. And then, as I said before, variety is important. So you get all those different phytonutrients in. So you want to look for different seasonal foods to add variety, different colors, and then even different preparation methods too. You don't always have to eat foods prepared the same way. Or oftentimes people ask me if they should only eat raw fruits and vegetables or something along those lines. But it's really important to do a variety of things. Some nutrients are better absorbed when the food is cooked, and some nutrients are better absorbed when the food is raw. So it's good to eat both raw and cooked. And then even when you cook your vegetables, in the wintertime, I tend to roast them. In the summertime, I tend to grill them, or I may steam them on the stovetop. So you want to just add variety to the way you prepare meals too. And then mindful eating is very important. We are such an on-the-go society, always connected to our electronics. When you're eating a meal, you should really be mindful and in tune and connected to the food that you're eating. If you're watching TV, you're reading emails, looking at your iPad, you're just going through a motion of eating without any connection to that food and to your sense of fullness. So I really encourage people to just set aside time for meals and to eat mindfully, being aware of what you're doing, enjoy the food. And that also helps with the overall hunger process and feeling satisfied with your meals. And on that note, it does take about 20 minutes for your brain to receive the message that your stomach is full. So there's certainly a time delay there. And when we are rushing through our meals, eating in the car or drinking our meals through a straw, 20 minutes goes by very fast. So this goes along with the whole mindful eating concept of, really taking time and allow your brain to catch up with your stomach in terms of eating a full meal and feeling satiated from that meal. So here are some resources that I like to use. As I mentioned, the American Institute for Cancer Research is a wealth of information, and I would strongly encourage you to check out that website. For recipes, these are some of the places I like to go. The Cancer Fighting Kitchen is a cookbook. You can see this is what it looks like. The chef's name is Rebecca Katz. She just really has a whole foods, plant-based approach to eating. She uses a lot of herbs and spices to flavor her foods. She also has a very good website if you're more of an electronic person, and the website is right there, RebeccaKatz.com. You could check out some of her recipes, see if you like her style of eating before you invest in the book. But I just find her recipes are very flavorful, and I use them a lot at home and in cooking programs that I've done. Cook for Your Life is an online website. The chef is a cancer survivor. The nice thing about that website is you can also search if you're looking for entrees or side dishes, or if you wanted something that was more vegetarian or vegan. So there's some nice search functions on that website. The Plant-Powered Dietitian. This is not so much cancer specific. This is written by a dietitian who herself is vegan, but she does offer alternatives for whether you're just more plant forward or vegetarian. She too has a very good website with a lot of recipes. She does a lot of cooking demonstrations on Facebook or other social media outlets. So her name is Sharon Palmer, and there's a lot of good resources from her too. A fellow dietitian that I like, her name is Julie Lanford, and her website is cancerdietitian.com. She's also does a lot of education and speaking, and she often has recorded webinars and podcasts on her website. So there's a lot of interesting topics there. And she also does some, has recipes and cooking demonstrations too. And another cookbook is this Cancer Survivor's Guide. This is a PDF that you can download. I believe there's a slight charge with it, but you can download it off the internet if you prefer electronic. This is more vegan based, but again, just another alternative for you. And just a quick reminder, those phone numbers, if you want to schedule a nutrition consultation, especially if you have individualized questions or if you're having any side effects from your treatment, it would probably be best to speak one-on-one with a dietitian so you get a very individualized and customized meal plan and nutrition plan to move forward with. This is a nice summary, this Heal Well guide. This has been put out by the American Institute for Cancer Research. It's about 30 pages long. And Diane is going to email this out to all of today's participants. So you'll have a nice summary electronic that you could download to your iPad or laptop, whatever you have, that you can refer to and read at your leisure. Okay, that's my part of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sue. This is such a wealth of information. I've been plant-based for 10 years myself, and I learned some things in this session. Really, really wonderful. Yes, I will, as a gift to all of you, Sue is going to provide, or I will email out the link to this plant-based guide, so you can all have a free copy of that. And the session is being recorded, so if you were following along and you're like, oh, I didn't write that down, or wait, how much did she say for, protein or portion sizes? I didn't write it down. Don't worry, we will have it on our Gilda's Club YouTube page, and I believe on our Facebook page as well. So you can go back, you can reference it if there's anything that you want to look back at on the presentation. So don't be shy. If you are on with us and you have a question, feel free to pop it into the chat. We have a little bit of time with Sue. We have a great opportunity, and she's a wealth of information. So if there's anything you feel that she didn't address, you can type it in your chat box, There was a question that came in about protein. I think that the question about protein is one in which people do worry about when they are going plant-based. But I think that you did a really nice job of talking about the transitions that you can make, that you might not necessarily be going straight all vegan, that it can be a transition. Go ahead.
Right, yes, that was a point. Right, so if, it really depends, excuse me, kind of where you're starting from.
Yeah.
So if you're starting from more like that standard American diet, more heavy on the processed foods, very meat heavy type diet, you're going to be taking baby steps. You're not going to be flipping a switch for the most part. So you're just going to, focus on one thing at a time. And, if you're looking to get started, I really recommend just kind of starting and focusing on your fruit and vegetable intake. If you're not quite at that 5 servings a day, I would start working on that, because that's the best way to add nutrients to your diet and kind of push out some of those less healthier foods in your diet. So if you're looking to get started, I would say focus on your fruit and vegetable intake first, and then gradually start to incorporate some of those other foods into your diet, trying new recipes and things like that. But it's not an overnight change. It's an evolving process.
Someone had a question about quinoa.
Mm-hmm.
I love quinoa. I think it's just such a versatile food, and can you talk a little bit about the benefits of that grain in particular? Assuming you might not be an expert on quinoa, but someone did ask that, and I think it kind of ties into the protein question, because I understand that quinoa has some plant protein in it. Is that correct?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So technically quinoa is a seed from a botanical and plant perspective, but from a nutrition perspective, we look at it as a whole grain because nutritionally has a profile similar to whole grains. And just like all whole grains, there is a small amount of protein. Quinoa is unique in that it's what we call a complete plant-based protein. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and animal proteins have all of the amino acids that our body needs, or the essential amino acids. Most plant-based foods only have some of the essential amino acids, but that's not an issue, because over the course of the day, by eating different protein foods, you end up getting all the essential ones. But quinoa is unique in that it contains all those essential amino acids. I like it personally because it cooks quickly. A lot of whole grains take 35 to 40 minutes to cook, but quinoa can cook in about 12 to 15 minutes. So it's very versatile, and it does have a good nutritional profile in terms of protein content, dietary fiber. So it's good to incorporate. But again, it gets back to variety. You want to maybe try some of those other whole grains too that you may not have experienced yet.
Nice. We had another question about, and this gets into portion size, which you did address, but I thought that this was an interesting question, so I'm going to read it. I belong to RAVS, the Rochester Area Vegan Society, which they're a great organization if you don't know about them. And we're told that portion size in a whole plant-based diet doesn't necessarily matter as much, that you can eat until you're satiated. So can you talk about, I'm interested, and I think that this question is getting at, feeling satiated, you want to feel satiated, be mindful of portion size, but if you're eating all whole food plant-based diet, because plant-based foods are less calorically dense, does it change with the portion size? Can you eat as much as you want? Basically, if you're eating, say a plate of carrots versus, a steak, I guess. Does that make sense, that question? It's sort of his question and then my question as well incorporated into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what your goals are. And I think that person would benefit if they could have access to a dietitian to maybe a little bit more of a one-on-one conversation. But yes, I don't think there's a green light to eat as much as you want. I think especially if your goals are weight management, you do have to look at that calorie in, calorie out equation and try to come up with a deficit so that you can lose weight. So it really depends on where you are and what your goals are. But again, the key to kind of feel that satiated is to balance your plate, rather than, having a whole plate of quinoa. That's not very balanced. You want to try to have, again, as I mentioned in that plate model, a couple of servings of vegetables, preferably ones that are different colors, a quarter of your plate some whole grain, and a quarter of your plate some sort of protein. So that might be another component. If your meals aren't really balanced with all of those food groups and nutrients, you might not feel that satiated. On that note, with vegetables, the non-starchy vegetables, so vegetables other than potatoes, corn, and peas, are the lowest in calories. So, if somebody needs a snack or is just finding that meal is not filling them up, even with the protein and the whole grains, then if you're going to go back for seconds, that would be what to go back for seconds on, not to go back and get more meat or fish or protein or grain, trying to fill up on those those non-starchy vegetables. So it's kind of a complicated question. So again, if you are asking that question and if you have access to an RD, I would recommend reaching out to them, because sounds like you need a little bit more individualized guidance. But I just think giving people a green light to eat as much as they want without telling them how to balance that out is not always the best approach. And it's not a one size fits all. So that might work for some people, but it doesn't seem like it's working for this person.
Yeah, and it sounds, like the suggestion would be, which is with most things, is to have, perhaps a one-on-one consultation with your team, with your nutritionist and your medical team. We had an interesting question just come in. And the question is, there's a couple questions within it. As a pancreatic cancer survivor, I avoid alcohol. But could you please address daily caffeine intake? So this person is asking about caffeine. And then the second question is, if you talk about caffeine, and then the second question is, they boil their veggies in a pan, and then so they boil them and then they add a little olive oil later. Is it leaching any nutrients out by boiling it first? Like, what would be your suggestion in terms of preparing veggies that would kind of keep vegetables where you're getting the most, I guess, bang for your buck with, with nutrients with vegetables? So, two questions, if you could address those questions.
Well, with caffeine, again, moderate intake, a couple of cups of coffee or tea a day is okay. I wouldn't be drinking caffeine throughout the day, but a moderate intake would be okay. And sometimes it's your individual tolerance. Some people are very sensitive to caffeine and can't have any at all. So, kind of depends on you. One thing I do point out, some people think green tea doesn't have caffeine in it, but it does. They assume it's like an herbal tea. So just making sure that you're aware of all the potential sources, but moderate intake would be all right. Tea and coffee are plant-based. They have phytonutrients in them. It's just that when we add a lot of sweetener or creamer to them, we kind of take away some of that nutrient benefit. But teas and coffees are certainly part of a plant-based diet and have, especially like green tea, has a lot of antioxidants in it. In terms of preparing your vegetables, some nutrients are water soluble, some of the B vitamins, and some are heat sensitive, such as vitamin C. So this is where, again, you talk about preparing foods differently. You want to have some raw fruits and vegetables so that you do get your vitamin C, whereas the cooked ones are going to have less. I recommend steaming or microwaving. Just get like a steamer basket and just put about 1 inch of water in the pan. You don't want to necessarily submerge the vegetables. You have good nutrient retention with steaming or microwaving because you don't have that leaching going on. So those would be some good ways to retain the nutrients. And then you could use the leftover water. You could, incorporate it into a broth or a soup if you wanted to. You probably retain some of the nutrients, but I personally just prefer to steam them, and I think that works pretty well.
Nice. That made me think of a question about frozen vegetables. I've heard that those can be a really great, first of all, quick thing to prepare, and then also that it's frozen kind of at the peak of freshness. So perhaps, frozen vegetables.
I think frozen vegetables are a great option. Yes, I always have a few bags in my freezer. There's days that just don't go according to plan, and I'm short on meal time, so a lot of the prep has been done. They can be just as nutritious as fresh. This time of year, I'm really capitalize on the local produce that's available, but we know winter time will be here and we won't have fresh local produce. So frozens are certainly a good option. They work well for small households. You can just take out as much as you want and put the rest back in the freezer so you're not wasting. I do hear that from a lot of people with small households. They try to buy a lot of fresh produce and they just can't eat it fast enough and they end up wasting it. And I am all about saving money and not wasting food. I eat every part of the fruit and vegetable that I can. So I really try to support people's efforts in keeping costs in line and being very resourceful.
So right now, during the pandemic, how are you serving patients in terms of if you had put in the presentation, if they call the numbers on there, they could schedule a consultation with a nutritionist. Are you offering telehealth, for people to meet over the computer? Is that a possibility?
Yes, I can't speak for Rochester Regional, but at UR Medicine in Wilmot, we can either do a phone consultation when, we do have limited, if somebody's here to see another provider, they can see me, but we're trying to limit the number of people coming in and out of the center because we have people actively undergoing chemotherapy and radiation, so they are immune suppressed. So Wilmot does have pretty strict visitor guidelines. So we are limiting that. So we've been doing the telehealth, so Zoom or phone consultations are available. And I feel like they've been pretty effective. Yes, unfortunately, we do lose a little something, but I think we can get a lot of the information across. A lot of my patient education handouts I can email to them so they can get access to resources. Through the Integrative Oncology Center, we've been offering some Zoom nutrition programs too. We've been doing some food demonstrations. We have one coming up on September 17th. We're going to be doing a family-friendly meal that night.
Oh, great.
So if we are, trying to redesign and adapt to our new normal here.
Yeah, that's great. And can folks get information about that event just on the Pluta on the website or on the probably on Facebook as well?
Yes, if you go to the Pluta Cancer Foundation website has the calendar on there, and if you go to Wilmot Cancer Institute and you go to Integrative Oncology, there's information on there too. Because with the Zoom programs, you do have to register ahead of time. So that's the only thing. You do have to make sure you get your registration in so that you can get the link for the program.
Nice. Well, this hour went by really, really fast and was just filled with such important information. Does anyone have any, before we conclude, we just have a couple more minutes, any burning questions about plant-based eating or nutrition for Sue? Let's see. We do have a question come in about, and this is a question I think someone else had asked too, just in terms of being mindful during COVID. I don't know if you can speak to any concerns about washing vegetables or during this time, if there's anything that you would suggest, and even pre-COVID, I think there's sometimes different recommendations about when you, depending on if you buy organic or, if you want to spray vegetables with some sort of wash or, but now I think, some people are mindful, and certainly in the beginning, I think we're confused about, oh my goodness, what do I do?
Yeah.
So that is one question that came in.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I get asked quite a bit. So there's no big changes in food safety recommendations from COVID. The evidence is pretty clear that it's not transmitted by food, but you do want to certainly take some good precautions. And if you're going through cancer treatment also, I usually say to avoid food bars and buffets, but I think most of those are shut down from COVID, so that's no longer really an issue. But with all fruits and vegetables, even organic, they should be washed before you eat them. So even if you're not going to, if it has an outer skin like a melon, an avocado that you're not going to eat, it's not only the risk of pesticides, but there's a lot of foodborne illness. We've had many E. coli and salmonella breakouts in the country, and those can be very life-threatening in some cases, especially the E. coli. So there is the possibility that there's bacteria on those outer peels and skins. So I recommend getting a produce brush, and if it has a hard skin on it, so like a melon, a potato, a beet, use your vegetable brush and scrub it. Again, that's with conventionally grown and organic produce. Obviously, things like berries that can't be scrubbed because they're very fragile. The best recommendation is to rinse them in cold water. There's no need to use any soaps or those vegetable sprays. They actually can leave a residue and can be harmful to your health. So the current recommendation is just to wash with plenty of cool running water, scrub if you can, even if it's a skin that you don't eat. The only exception would be if you have something like a pre-washed vegetable, a bag of lettuce maybe, or some of those pre-packaged produce that you can get. On the front of it, it might say like triple washed, ready to eat. In those cases, you don't have to go ahead and wash them again. actually they recommend that you don't, because you're actually opening up the possibility of recontaminating them. So they've already been thoroughly washed by the correct procedures where they were packaged. So if you take a look at some of those lettuce tubs, prepackaged bags of produce, if it says ready to eat, triple washed, you don't have to go ahead and do it, but everything else should be thoroughly washed before you eat it or rinsed.
Well, Sue Czap, thank you so much for your time today. This has just been really wonderful. Thank you everyone for attending live today. I will follow up with an email with this plant-based guide, and the session has been recorded, so you can access it probably by tomorrow on our YouTube channel if there's anything that you want to access from our presentation. So thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
And everyone have a great day and take care. Be well.
Be well, yes. Thank you. Stay safe. Bye now.
Bye-bye.